Hello and welcome to the Bellingham Real Estate Podcast. I'm Paul Balzotti. I'm here with Hannah Jones. Welcome, Hannah.
Thank you.
And welcome back, I should say.
Yeah.
You're our first return broker, which is awesome. And today we're going to talk about the new accessory dwelling unit, ADU laws that were just enacted. And just to kind of give everybody a little bit of a rundown, we did a podcast, episode 6, you can check it out, where we ran through your story about you've obviously built an ADU. I shouldn't say obviously, but you have built an ADU. And we also talked about the basics of ADUs and kind of how to build them and all that kind of stuff. So please check out that episode if you want to learn more about Hannah's story and more about just the general information on ADUs. But today we are going to get right into this new law that enacted, which is a big deal. That's why I want to have you back on, right? So let's talk about it. So tell us what has gone on.
Yes. So this new House bill that was passed at the state level is all about improving the ability for jurisdictions in urban growth areas to allow ADUs on single-family lots. There's a couple big changes on this bill, but some of the highlights include being able to build up to 2 ADUs, which up to this point you can only build 1 on a single-family lot, and not requiring as much parking. So previously you'd have to show 2 parking spots for the single-family residence and then 1 parking spot for the ADU. Now, if you're within a transportation stop, public transportation within a half a mile, you don't have to provide parking at all. Let's see. One other big piece of the bill is jurisdictions can't limit the ADU to be less than 1,000 square feet, which now allows for 2 bedrooms in the ADU, whereas previously it was 800 square feet and less. The intent of this bill is we just don't seem to have enough housing in our area, and this is to help create infill in growing urban areas in our cities to permit to allow more housing.
And so backing it from there, so this law was enacted, I think, in April in Washington State. But the big piece is like sometimes you hear of a law being enacted, and then you go, okay, well, what does that really mean for us?
Yeah.
And the bigger news is that the city of Bellingham has basically said just recently, it's a go. I mean, is that correct, or is there anything that the city of Bellingham is saying that is it 90% of it, 100% of it? I mean, because you were there, so
So the council voted a couple weeks ago, as of the filming of this, to adopt like 80% of this bill ahead of about a year and a half early than they had to. So this bill says during your next comprehensive review, you have to adopt everything in this bill. And the council voted to adopt it early. But the one thing in the bill they didn't adopt is owner occupancy. So that was another big piece of this bill, that investors can build ADUs when they don't occupy the property. Up to this point, you had to occupy the single-family residence or the ADU to get a permit for one. Yeah, it's interesting because it's just interesting the council has voted to adopt it early. They just really want to create opportunities for more housing in Bellingham at an earlier point, but it's controversial. People have very different opinions about this bill.
Yeah.
Some people are freaked out. They think, oh no, there goes Columbia or South Hill or Edgemore. And this applies to more than just us, by the way. This is Seattle. This is Bellevue. These are really large populous areas. But in my opinion, I don't think we're going to see a immediate everyone's applying for an ADU permit and all of a sudden we have 4plexes on every single family lot. It's still expensive to build an ADU. An example would be I was talking with someone yesterday who got a quote to build an ADU on their property. The cost was about $250,000, but then they realized, oh no, we have sewer issues and stormwater issues. We have some utility access troubles that bumped the cost up to $450,000. And they had some bedrock issues as well, and it became impossible for them or unbudgeted. It didn't make sense for them to build one. I think that's going to happen a lot, where initially people are going to think, we're going to have so many of these in our neighborhood, but then the reality is people don't really have the flex to be able to do that. That being said, I will preface that with people have an enormous amount of equity right now and easily access to HELOCs, home equity line of credits. I do think that we're set up in a way for people to be able to pull on their equity to build an ADU, but for some it'll be more feasible than others.
Well, it's you just exactly kind of summarize the 2 points that I think are so important to make. That one, this isn't going to be this crazy thing where all of a sudden we're just going to see massive infill and all that kind of stuff, and it's not going to, in the next couple of years change the look and feel of any particular neighborhood. But it is a huge deal. So I mean, when people are moving here, one of the things we always talk about is, why is it expensive to live here? Why is it cost prohibitive? And it's partially because the city of Bellingham makes it difficult to build, right? And it's expensive to build here. And it's still going to be expensive to build here. Like you said, you still have stormwater, you have different things that can come up and building permits and all those kind of things. But when you all of a sudden have just this massive opening for being able to develop within these lots, that's huge. And this is for the, I mean, it's a Washington state law.
Yes.
So it's going to be effective everywhere. But the city of Bellingham specifically, moving forward, endorsing this in a lot of ways right away, and you hit on a couple things here. So you have, when you brought up some of the, and this is, and we're getting into the ramifications of this, right, and what we're thinking. So to me, it's a total positive, right? Is that your opinion too?
Yes, I am biased. I do. I will say that I think additional dwelling units, ADUs, are an amazing way to create infill in a city while also retaining the character and quality of living conditions in a neighborhood. You don't have massive apartment buildings all of a sudden going up 100 plus units on these single family lots. You just have a couple units that maintain that craftsman look in the neighborhood. That being said, this bill does mention limiting design review for the ADUs as well. So jurisdictions can't say, oh, well, that doesn't have the right kind of cedar shingles, therefore we don't want to permit you to do this ADU. They can't do that necessarily anymore. Another piece is as well limiting the permit fees, impact fees for ADUs as well. They can't be exorbitant. I don't remember the exact. Basically, they're limited on what they can charge for a permit, which just makes it more easy to build an ADU because, I mean, you could have a permit fee in Bellingham of $30,000 just to build an ADU, just the permit. So that has been preventative for people. So that we might see that reduced as well. Oh, well, I was just going to say too, I am biased. I am supportive of this because I think it creates a beautiful way for infill. But there are a lot of people really nervous this is going to just, like, all of our neighborhoods are going to become apartment buildings. That is not the intent of this bill. And so I was talking with Kathy Bell, who's a senior planner with the city, and she's working on the comprehensive review, getting started. And the reality is it's not going to be that. There's still a lot of limiting factors with ADUs, meaning like build area. Mm-hmm. You have to use the basic building standards still apply. So setbacks, 10 feet, 5 feet from the property line, access to utilities. There's still a lot of ramifications that limit the build area of an ADU. Yeah,
that makes perfect sense because you just have a lot of developments where it just won't make sense. Like you just won't have the space to, pull a car in or place an actual, 800-900 square foot building, So, but you do have a lot of these alley access, in the core neighborhood type properties. You have other areas that are a little bit, maybe do have a little more property in city limits where it clearly could have a second home. And I look at it from the standpoint of everybody. It's interesting to me because not that I don't empathize with people that are resistant to this or whatever, because I understand exactly that concern. Ultimately, though, it's usually a lot of the same people who are not wanting this that are also, on our Facebook page, complaining about the prices of houses.
Yes.
And it's like, well, you can't have it both ways because, this is truly a way to create more affordable ownership and not just, I should say two things, affordable ownership and just more affordable, just in general living, because it basically, you have two things happening. One, if you're a homeowner and you're able to, I have a client who I think, I don't know if I talked about this on the other podcast we did, but obviously you can talk about your experience where it's basically essentially paying your mortgage.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, with your ADU. I have a client who She was, secretary for like a law office in town. Very, not a super high salary job. And she bought a home in kind of the Cornwall Park neighborhood, and it was 2 homes. It had a home and an ADU, small home and an ADU. She moved into the smaller home, basically the ADU, and rented, the AD or the main house essentially is what she did.
Yeah.
And so she basically, had this bigger mortgage, but then most of it was paid for by the ADU, and it was like it stretched her out on what she could qualify for on her mortgage, but then she essentially was living cheaper than the rent. And that is something that as these get developed and as people develop them, they'll have this upfront cost with their equity line. But if your equity line is $300,000 or whatever, and especially when rates come down, if your rent that you get exceeds that, then it's like your cost of living, your cost of ownership just went down.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, it's like there's a lot of people who want to live in the city or live somewhere in city limits, and they don't want to be in an apartment, but they would love to be in. Especially, I love that it moved up to 1,000 square feet, because it's like, they maybe they didn't want to move into a 500 square foot little cottage, but maybe they would be happy with a detached 1,000 square foot home in the city limits, and they don't want to be in an apartment per se. And creating more rental housing options that lowers essentially rent effect.
Yeah.
I mean, I shouldn't say it lowers rents, but it certainly puts pressure on rents continuing to increase if there's more availability because there's more development. So
it's
all around
basic supply and demand.
Yeah.
You create more supply, and all of a sudden prices can't come down or level out or regulate. And that's what we need in Bellingham. We have a lot of people that want to live here.
Yeah.
And so if we create more supply with ADUs, it'll really help regulate our housing market a little bit. One thing I just remembered I forgot that also applies to this bill is the condominiumization of single-family
good to
ADU
explain.
situations, which is that's probably the one part of the bill I'm a little skeptical about, but I could see how it would be beneficial. In Seattle, I think they've been doing this for a while. And what it is let's say you have a single-family home with an ADU or 2 ADUs. Up to this point, that is a single-family property that can be sold as a unit. Now you can condominiumize that complex. So you could say, okay, the ADU is valued at one amount, the single-family house is valued at another. You can sell them independently. So all of a sudden you have a condo, 2 condo units on a lot, or 3 or 4 potentially. I'm biased as well with this bill. You mentioned like offsetting your mortgage. I just know that my personal financial trajectory changed so dramatically when I had an ADU, the income from it offsetting my mortgage. And I think that there are so many people out there that could benefit, their personal finances benefit from having an ADU. And that little extra rental income can just make you feel more comfortable with your mortgage payment. Plus, it's a little bit of a plan B. If you have a month that you just don't, I don't know, maybe you lost your job, maybe you have just had a financial stress, a medical bill, that ADU income can regulate your life in a way that just makes your finances feel more comfortable. I see so many benefits to ADUs. It creates supply. It gives another rental unit that's not an apartment building. It gives ownership and an investment opportunity for homeowners in a way that is practical. And it just creates more housing that we need.
Yeah.
But one other concern people have is cars. Cars are a big concern, and this bill really limits parking and what's required for parking. And I would agree.
Limits parking in the sense that it makes it easier to develop. Whereas before, that was one of the big prohibitive things is like, okay, you don't have this extra parking area, so you can't make this an ADU. That's what you're saying.
It's been one of the biggest preventative parts of ADU permitting has been that parking requirement,
right,
that people just don't have the space on their lot to put another parking spot that's independent from their single family house. My bias with that is that from my experience in like Europe, in Europe you have way more people using public transportation and a lot more people that don't even own a vehicle. In the United States, we are highly dependent on cars. It's just the way our country has developed. We are a car country. But if we have more units. Like, you look at like the city of Seattle, way more people don't own cars in Seattle because public transportation is more widely used than it is in Bellingham. Even though we could have a problem with more cars on the road in Bellingham, I think we'd also see an increase of people using public transportation, which from a energy efficiency perspective, I have heard, don't know the stats, but I have heard that when more people use public transportation, we use less gas, we use less energy, like people walk more, they move more. Overall, our society is healthier when people use public transportation. So hopefully we'd see a more movement of that as people consider not owning vehicles if they live in the city with an ADU.
Yeah, and we have a culture of people that love biking, and I could see a decent percentage of the populace that would be wanting to rent a cottage in the core neighborhoods, being somebody who also uses their bike a lot. So I think you're right. It wouldn't be as bad as people thinking it, and it'll help improve should say encourage, the use of public transportation and biking and things like that. But going back to the two things I wanted to touch on. One is the condominialization.
It's a hard word.
Condominiumizing a property. The reason why that's really huge is the ability to condominiumize these properties. It makes it much more cost efficient to be able to essentially develop your property, because you don't have to go through the same permitting process. You don't have to go through the same planning process. So again, when we're mentioning all these things, the parking, the condominiumizing, all these things, it's basically eliminating red tape and eliminating regulation and opening up the window to different ways that people can develop their property. So it's pretty amazing in that way. And then I also want to mention one other thing that we haven't really touched on, which is, we have an aging population. You have baby boomers coming into,
yes,
and the ability to, how many people because of this might be able to say, instead of I can't afford, maybe they can't afford to, or they don't have the room to live they don't, cohabitat with their elderly mother or, mother-in-law or whatever parents, but they do want to develop this ADU for their parents, to help take care of them or whatever, like a true mother-in-law type of situation. That just that extended family, whatever that is, maybe it's like that kid that came back from college, and whatever it is. I mean, there's a lot of family benefit to this potentially too.
I think so much so. One other financial benefit is with the baby boomer generation, we have this massive amount of wealth, especially real estate wealth, that's getting passed down now to the next generation. And let's say here's a scenario where you have the elderly parent is getting older, their house has a bunch of steps, and they also want to pass their equity down to their child, but their child doesn't want to own their home. It's too big. It's whatever. It's not where they want to live. Well, they could pull on their equity. They could build the ADU on their child's property, and all of a sudden their child's property increases in value, and it's a one way to pass down wealth in a tax-free strategy. Basically.
That's true. That's like, so you can kind of go both ways. The kids might build it for the parents, or the parents might build it
on their child to pass down their wealth.
That's awesome.
There's a lot of ways. I just feel like ADUs give homeowners control, like a lot of control. And I also think that people who build ADUs are adding to the value of their property. They care about their property. There's a heart in it that apartment buildings just don't have. People, like, I want my ADU to be really nice and comfortable and welcoming. I don't want it to be a shabby, beat up apartment, So there's care and attention that come with this.
And 1,000 square feet instead of 800, it means the functional utility of 1,000 square feet. You could either, if it's a one bedroom, now you could have a big kitchen, you could have a spacious living room, you could have a really nice primary suite, or you could do a true 2-bedroom and still have pretty good functional utility.
Yeah.
So it also just makes a big difference in when you mention families and things like that. I think that size has also been restrictive as far as like whether somebody feels like it's the space that they really need for 2 families or 2 whatever. So yeah, I mean, I think we could talk all day about how much we love ADUs.
Yes.
So but
But if you don't like ADUs,
yeah.
you can also tell us about it.
Yeah, but I think that we've covered kind of the basics of, what's changing and some of the ramifications of that, which we think are generally mostly positive. And so, but if you have more questions, I want you to reach out to Hannah. She's obviously an expert. She's built one herself. She works with investors. She works with ADUs. She works with the whole gamut of residential real estate, and she's fabulous. So thank you for coming on again, Hannah. Thank you for listening or watching, you guys. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.